Hi, everyone. Welcome to the CXO and CHRO Walk Into a Bar, where we share insights at the intersection of talent and revenue. I'm Michelle Strasburger, CEO of HR Rebooted, a fractional HR consulting firm focusing on rebooting culture.
And I'm Dominique St. Fleur, CEO of Intramark. We create a data layer on culture to help organizations identify hidden risks like productivity gaps and unwanted turnover.
And today we are talking about operational efficiencies as it relates to fractional talent. And that's a term that's been tossed around and kind of, I don't know if we can call it glamorized. But I think people are wondering what it is. It's one of the first questions I get because that's what I do. And it's one of the first questions I get when I talk to potential clients or somebody calls me. It's like, what is? I even get messages on LinkedIn. What is a fractional CHRO? What does that mean? And I think this is a great conversation when we're talking about operational efficiencies, because I think a lot of times when we think about that and think about in an organization, we have to save money or cut costs, we immediately go to cutting people. And so this is an interesting way to bring in talent without cutting people.
Absolutely. And it's, I think, you hit it on the head. Is fractional has been something that's been thrown around a lot, or has been introduced in the market. And really start, trying to understand what are the differences of fractional executive or talent versus short, contract, or versus consultant, or versus part-time, or versus full-time even. And so, Michelle, I think no one's better to clarify for us, what is fractional, especially in relation to and how it's different from the other types of talent that an organization could think about deploying.
Mm-hmm. So high level, if we start with what each of the categories are, and of course, like everything, it's nuanced and there's going to be exceptions to the rule, but like high level, a temp is brought in to do a specific task, and typically at a individual contributor level, right? So I need somebody in customer service. I have a client right now that's looking for a temp in accounting and finance. And so we'll bring in a temp. Most of the time it's for a short period of time and a defined period of time, like 90 days, to help cover if maybe we've got turnover or there's been an increase in workflow, and temp labor is a great way to kind of ebb and flow your business as your business ebbs and flows. And we see it a lot also within manufacturing and distribution when you have a higher period and you need to bring more people in to be able to produce the products. There's also temp to perm, so you can bring people on if they're good in that temp thing. It's a way of trying somebody out, and then you can hire them full time after that. It's a really great option for getting somebody in quickly, and a lot of times you're not hiring somebody that has a specific skill set. You might be training them the skill set. So you bring them in, you train them. And so they're kind of flexible workers, for example. And then so that's temps. And then consultants are typically brought in for a specific product or project, sorry. And they could have just been trained by a consulting organization to work with the client, understand the needs, and then give a recommendation. And a lot of times your consultants are not staying. Thank you, Neha. I posted an article this morning just to shift gears and I had to dig it up out of the graveyard because I wrote it a while ago and I don't think I ever did anything with it. But it was very timely, this topic. And so Neha shared that in the link as well, like 3 specific times you could hire a fractional person and what that looks like. So going back to a consultant, sometimes consultants don't see a project all the way through. They go in, they do an analysis, an assessment of whatever it is, and then they make a recommendation. They may recommend to bring somebody else in to do the work or do the next steps of the project, but they sometimes don't see it through all the way. And I think that's the difference between fractional and consultant. With a fractional, you're getting the skill set at the executive level of that you need in your organization. You may not be able to afford that full time, but you need that knowledge and that trade experience and things like that. And they're bringing that to the experience to the table. So when you have a fractional, they're typically specialized. So fractional chief people officer, fractional chief marketing officer, fractional chief financial officer, fractional chief technology officer. And so they're very specialized in that area, and they're bringing that skill set of being an executive in their experience to your organization. I would love to hear from people in the audience. I did invite a few fractionals that are in my network to this as well, like how you define it and what you're telling clients. But I did see on LinkedIn the other day that somebody posted about a fractional because it's a trendy word. And she said, I'm not a fractional because I give you 100%. And I don't think that fractionals don't give you 100% of who they are, right? We bring who we are to the table. And I think that's a great thing about fractionals is that we get to choose the work we do, and we get to say no to the work we don't want to do. And so we're already excited and motivated to do that work and go in and help them with it.
Absolutely.
So distinction on the differences. Was I clear enough?
It was very, very clear. And just kind of based on my research and my understanding of the differences, and your explanation as well, what's coming out clear to me, I think the area where people may get the more murky on what's fractional versus others, what between the fractional and consultant. I think it's a little bit clear with contractor or contract work. Again, probably tactical, short period of time work to kind of fill in the gap. Part-time is don't quite need a full-time talent, but it's kind of like they're tied to the rhythm of business for the most part, but not on a full-time basis, just on a part-time basis. Then it gets a little interesting where it's more, okay, fractional versus consultant. And I think you delineated that very, very well. Is typically a consultant will come in with perspective and expertise, but really their goal and end product is to give you a set of recommendations for that organization to execute on, and typically, may not be there to, quote unquote, own the work that happens after the recommendations given. But I think the key difference in the way I think about fractional as well is the fractional is about driving impact and outcome, versus other types. And I think that comes through in the economics between a consultant and a fractional. Fractionals brought in, the focus is not necessarily on what are the number of hours it's going to take me for you to focus on this area, right? It's not hours driven. It's more about, I need this outcome from you. I need, you've been in this role before or something like that. And so the fractional will come in and drive a certain outcome, versus the economics of a traditional consultant would be on an hourly basis, right? It's going to take me X amount of hours to give you perspective or give you some advice on what to do. So it even shows up a little bit more in how the economics play out. But just a few things I picked up on from what you said and some of the research that I did, because I was curious about this area as well. And I think you clarified that quite nicely in helping me frame it as well. So, but you mentioned something that I'd love to follow on is, when would it make sense for an organization to consider, fractional talent? And if you can touch on as well, not only the scenarios, but also what's the word I'm looking for, the maturity level of the organization. So I think there's kind of like a table. There's maturity and then scenario. I'd love to get your perspective on that. And thanks for sharing that article that you wrote on that.
Yeah, I'm pulling that up right here so we can see it. So I think that I've hit a couple of areas. I don't think that in the article that's the end all be all. I think there are other scenarios and when fractional talent can come into an organization. I really think it comes down to when an organization needs strategic talent, but they're not yet ready for somebody full time. and that can be project based, right? They need strategic talent on a specific project. It could be the growth phase they're in. Maybe they're they're not quite startup, but they're not quite a big company, and they need to formalize the department, and they need somebody to bring in that strategic mindset to help kind of evolve and change things in the department, set that strategic direction. So it could be based on size of the organization. It could also be based on the project need and the skill set that you have in-house. And it can also be like, I really need to accelerate the growth of my organization, and I need to bring in some strategic talent, but I don't want to pay for a CMO, right? I don't want to pay for a CTO, but I want some of the expertise and tell me if I'm going in the right direction. And so that would be a great time to bring in a fractional.
And I like that, because that bleeds into, how do we think about operational efficiency and the right type of talent that you need, right? So I think by giving us options in the market, right, between fractional, consultant, temp, contract, part-time, full-time, really, I look at all those options as, what's the best option for my scenario, for my situation, and what dollars make the most sense, right? It's really thinking about operational efficiency as bringing the right level of talent at the right time, irrespective of maturity for the organization. I don't think fractional is, at least my opinion, strictly for younger companies, although that's where it's going to be more popular for sure. But I think there's opportunities with more mature companies, or again, really depends on the scenario that you're in. But really thinking about operational efficiency as part of like choosing the right level of talent. And I think fractional really does help drive some operational efficiency, especially for younger firms that, to your point, Michelle, need to establish that function. Bring in that fractional talent to really set the foundation and the framework, and then potentially bring someone in more long-term and permanent.
Yeah, I have a client that's kind of in that situation. They're a more mature company. They had a CHRO. That CHRO was leaving because the job wasn't really like a big job, but the CEO wanted a high-level executive in that seat to be an advisor, to help, with the team, keep the morale up, help with the culture. And so I came in because they didn't need somebody full-time, but they understood the value of having that strategic mindset at the table. And especially because they had it before, they understood the value of it, but didn't want to bring another full-time person in, knowing that the job really didn't command that level for somebody.
Absolutely. So you touched on the scenario where, it's clear when an organization to bring in fractional talent. Is there a scenario where an organization is not ready for fractional talent, or should not be thinking about fractional talent? Are there specific situations where it's overkill or not the right level of talent? What are those scenarios where the opposite may be true?
I think if you're, I don't know. I think it depends on the fractionals, because you could be a startup in the technology space and want to bring in a fractional CTO, right? You've got a really strong developer that's helping you with it, but you really want to make sure that you're on the right road for strategy and direction, and really thinking through the technology and the software development and all of that. But you might be super early stage and still getting funding, right? And can't afford a full-time CTO. That's a great way to go, but you might not then need you might not then want to add in a fractional CHRO or something like that until you've got more momentum going forward. So I think it really isn't just like, oh, don't bring in any fractionals at a certain point, but really thinking strategically about what I want to do, what do I want to achieve, and where do I need to focus first? Because I know as founders, especially in startups, we want to do everything. And fractional is a great way to achieve that. I can bring in a fractional CMO and get the marketing stuff I need done, because that's a big draw on my time. I can bring in a fractional CTO to help with the technology piece and make sure that's going in the right direction, and we're not making mistakes on the technology going out of the gate. I can bring in a fractional CHRO to help set the culture of the organization and make sure I have all the right things in place so that we're ready to grow. But really being thoughtful about what are my needs today and in the future, and how do I get there, and what, like, let's do that like crawl, walk, run thing before throwing it all in there.
I really like that. So what I'm hearing is timing matters a lot. And for an evolving organization, having a stacked C-suite of fractionals again, you got to consider funding and other priorities and other investments and, other projects that you have going on. And, CEO of an organization has to really be thoughtful of resource allocation. And so the timing of when you bring in a fractional and when you convert that fractional role into a full-time role, and then think about bringing in the next fractional to kind of stepstone your way to where you want to be. But I like that a lot, because it's not just about the stage of the organization, because we think, okay, I'm a growing startup, fractional no matter what. It's more about, it's a little bit more nuanced than that. It's I'm a growing startup, but I need to sequence things more properly, and which fractional I bring in, and where, again, you still have that menu of talent that you could pick from. And so, again, some roles may be great part-time, full-time, fractional, and being thoughtful of where the organization is, where it's heading, and making sure the sequencing's right. So that's what I heard, and I think that's.
I also think it's important to be thoughtful about when you bring in a fractional, of how that impacts the team, and being very clear on the expectations and how it's going to work. And, understanding the expectations of the team is important. So we had a client once, and we were talking to them about bringing in a CHRO, fractional or non-fractional. And the HR manager said, well, that's what I do. And so now you bring in, without addressing that, you bring in the CHRO or a fractional CHRO, and then that person doesn't want to work with them. And so making sure that the team is on the same page, that we're communicating, and we're and involving the fractional person in that conversation of how do we set up the team for success, because the fractional may only be giving 10 hours a week or 20 hours a month or whatever it looks like as part of the agreement, and the person there is saying, well, if you're the CHRO, shouldn't you be full-time, and blah, blah, blah. So I think there has to be a communication piece to it when you're putting the team together, so that they can start off on the right foot.
This sparked a question for that I have for you, Michelle, is what, in getting onboarded, when I think fractional, right, I think time to impact is super important, right? You're being brought in to drive a very specific outcome. More than likely within a very specific function. So time to impact matters, right? What has, in some of your previous engagements, what has a client done for you, or what have you done for yourself to help you get onboarded very efficiently as a fractional executive coming into an organization? Are there some best practices where, boom, this helped me get onboarded very quickly and hit the ground running?
Mm-hmm. I think it's, getting in, because you're not going to be that ingrained in the business. So trying to get as much information as you can, and going in with that curious mindset, and asking questions, and meeting with people. And so that I spend a lot of my time in organizations having one-on-ones with the executive team to make sure that I'm staying on top of what's going on in the organization, because I'm not necessarily in it every day. But I would also say that being very clear up front on what you can do. Not every fractional talent is the same, right? And it's not just like there's fractional HR, there's fractional technology, there's fractional marketing. Yeah. But within those buckets, they all bring something different to the table. So really understanding your need and what that specific fractional can do for you to meet those goals is really important.
Yeah. And typically what you're doing is, and again, I'm just, from my research, you're bringing someone who knows or kind of seen things before, seen the space, before jumping into an environment, has probably seen some elements of it in previous companies or previous organizations. And I think that's another kind of hidden benefit of a fractional executive. It's kind of like kind of some of the benefits of a consultant. One of the benefits of a consultant is that they get to do many projects and they get to see a lot of things. And they get to kind of draw patterns, from working with a variety of organizations and customers, where the consultant may stop and where the fractional, executive may come in is the implementation part, or more specifically with fractional, really driving a very specific outcome and results. And so, again, with an executive who's fractional, they've had the benefit of seeing different things, and being able to kind of jump into that environment and say, I've seen some elements of this before in the previous situation. Here are some best practices, maybe potentially cross industry. That knowledge sharing, I think, is super valuable, and a super valuable element that a fractional executive may bring in that a full-time executive may not necessarily. So going back to your point, Michelle, sequencing matters, because if an organization is, let's say, mature, but the particular function isn't mature, right? Bringing in a fractional who's seen different things to help that function just kind of get established. Then when it's more rhythm of business and kind of steady state and just making sure that it's keeping pace with the organization long term, maybe that's when the full-time executive comes in. But being able, especially at the foundational level, to bring in just a very diverse perspective of what you've seen out there and best practices and issues, and bring that in, I think there's a big benefit with a fractional executive, that just being able to touch many things is valuable.
Yeah, I agree. 100%.
You see that way? Okay.
I do. And I also don't think there's like a specific light that goes off that says it's time to hire a fractional. I think it's one of those things where you think it's one of those things you can have in your tool belt, right? And so when your team's coming to you and saying, oh, we're really struggling, we really should hire somebody that knows how to do this. A lot of times, I'm brought in late. And so I focus on helping organizations scale without losing their soul. And so a lot of times they're at a point where they've grown, right? We've all been in organizations that were smaller and have grown very quickly. And then all of a sudden it feels different. And you all of a sudden have high turnover, and you all of a sudden have disengaged employees, and you all of a sudden have a hard time recruiting. And CEOs are banging their heads against the wall going, I've tried everything. We have a ping pong table. I've given people more money. I've done all these things and it's not working. And I'm just bleeding people and bleeding money, and I need to give my shareholders value. And so they're stuck in this place. And so that's when they reach out and then because that's what I do, just to your point of I've seen this before. I know the symptoms. This is the issue. And we can get to the root cause of it really quickly and then start to come up with a plan of action.
Where my mind went, I think that scenario that you laid out, what I thought of was the specialization that you get, especially with the fractional CHRO, for example, is bringing someone in. And again, it goes back to your comment of sequencing, right? The timing to bring in a fractional executive like yourself is potentially one of the great scenarios would be, I'm transitioning as an organization from one stage to another. I need to make that chasm. I need to close that gap. Let me bring in a fractional who has done this before, has seen organizations transition from startup to maybe mid-size organization where cultural expectations are different. My hiring expectations are going to be different. There is going to be a visible change within the organization even with employees that are there from one stage to another. And I need someone, to your point, who knows those symptoms, can get ahead of those for that period. Then that function gets established at that new steady state. than potentially bringing in someone, who's dealt with, more mid-sized organizations more consistently,
Mm-hmm.
can come in. So I see a lot of different setups and specializations where
There
it
are,
makes a
yeah,
lot of sense.
there are a lot of different setups too. And you could have a fully functioning, I'm going to just say HR because that's the area that I'm in. You could have a fully functioning HR team with an HR leader and things are going great, but there's this one piece that's not working well. And so, that's when you might bring in a fractional, and there might be a leader. And that's where I think you need to make sure that the expectations are very clear and that there's no fighting over territory, and understanding who's going to do what and what the goals are and who's going to attack those goals. So
I like that. And taking it back to, intersection of talent and revenue, our topic, specifically is fractional, and specifically how fractional helps drive operational efficiency. How would, a CXO think about ROI for a fractional? And that's going to be tough, right? Because every scenario is different, every industry is different, every setup's different. There's a lot of variability. So there's of course, no perfect answers to most questions, but how would one begin to think about? Because I think one thing a CXO should be thinking about as they're bringing a fractional person is having some clear KPIs and measuring what outcome looks like and what a successful outcome looks like. But potentially, what does good ROI look like for a fractional? How does the CXO know? How does a CXO know they made the right investment in a fractional?
I think it depends on the engagement, and it should be decided up front. And that should be, this is what we're going to achieve. This is what you're going to see. And those KPIs are then in place. I think initially off the bat, if you're bringing in a full-time person versus a fractional, you've got some cost savings because you're not paying the full-time cost and the load of a full-time executive. But if you're just focused on one specific goal in one specific area, I think it should be clearly identified up front. And then to your point, have KPIs measured and check-ins. And that should all be part of the contract and the agreement of like, this is the goal. This is how we're going to achieve that. This is when we're going to achieve that. And this is how we're going to measure that. And we're going to do check-ins at, 30 days, 90 days, 6 months, however long the agreement is for.
And what I love about what you said as well was it there may be a temptation, especially for organizations that's scaling or maturing, to just bring in a fractional to bring in a fractional, right? We just need a fractional CHRO because we know we need an HR person.
Because it's cheaper.
Because it's cheaper right? Or something like that, right? But that's probably the wrong way to think about the ROI, where, instead of just having someone there, quote unquote, fractional and just kind of there, really what you're saying is, I am being brought in to drive a very specific outcome for this organization, given its stage, given its scenario. And that outcome should be defined up front so that we can measure, whether or not that outcome is met and how much value that outcome is driven. So, it's not fractional. When I think about fractional, more broadly, it's not a filler. It's not an interim talent, right? It's not an interim, strictly type of resource. It's also really thinking about, hey, there's a very specific outcome I need you to drive in this function, given my stage in the organization. So I think those KPIs and ROI, the ROIs related to those KPIs, are very, very definable up front. To your point.
Absolutely, and they're important.
Cool stuff.
Yeah. Hi, Aaron. I just have to say hi to Aaron here. I'll pop up his comment. I did see your call come in. I will follow up with you later. Thank you. But it does, you can have, employees burning out. And so you need to think about fractional talent as a way to help with that as well. It's a way to balance work.
And since we're almost at time, Michelle, what's a nugget that you want to make sure we all walk away with when it comes to fractional? What's one thing that we should not forget?
I think, as you were saying in your last conversation, that it is a strategic resource, right? It is, and you have to really be thoughtful about when you put it in place, but it can help create operational efficiencies and help you to get to your goals faster without having to hire full-time talent and pay for full-time talent when you're not yet ready for that. Full-time talent is great. There's a lot of great talent out there, but you might not be ready for that. And so you can lean into this for operational efficiencies and to help meet your goals.
Love it. Love it. It's this is it's going into this topic was very, very helpful for me because it gave me an opportunity to kind of do some research and understand when, where, why with the different types, specifically fractional. So I really appreciated diving into this with you, Michelle. So thank you for educating us.
Thank you. Thanks for giving me the floor.
No, it's amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks everybody for joining. We'll see you next Thursday.
Thank you all. Thank you, Neha.